And so the last few ideas with euthanasia, Avram ben Avram S. Avram, who is the author of the Nishmas Avram, said there's a general approach when it comes to end-of-life situations. All patients must be given food, drink, oxygen, other normally accepted life-sustaining measures. Patient with a chronic incapacitating but not terminal illness must be treated exactly as any other patient, and full resuscitative measures must be carried out. A patient with a terminal illness must also be treated in terms of daily sustenance, but if the patient is in cardiac or respiratory arrest, that will add to the suffering if the arrest is because of the terminal disease as expected, the natural course of illness. You don't have to resuscitate. It's maybe wrong. It's wrong to do so. If, however, the arrest arises unexpectedly from a cause unrelated to the underlying disease, or if the complication develops which is unconnected to the disease, full treatment must be given as for any other patient. So he goes over some of the key points there. General approach to end-of-life situations. I like to review the concept of double effect. That means there are good and bad effects of the same action. Morally can act if there's proper intention. So morphine, for instance, if you're giving it not to hasten somebody's respiratory demise, but to alleviate their pain, then it's okay to give. The AMA, Code of Medical Ethics, here you can see number 3, does not distinguish between withholding and withdrawing life-sustaining treatment. While there may be emotional differences between not initiating an intervention at all and discontinuing it later in the course, there's no ethical difference between withholding and withdrawing treatment. This is definitely in contradiction to Jewish medical law, which clearly, as I pointed out halachically, withholding is certainly better than withdrawing. You're never allowed to withdraw, actively kill somebody, unless you're removing Maser Hamonea, the thing that's actually actively, keeping the patient alive. That's a little complicated because, so what does that mean? Are you allowed to withdraw a ventilator that's Monea, the person from dying, but still it's an active type of taking away. So here's the point of the RCA. Once the patient has been placed on life support, can it ever be removed? It's forbidden to perform an act that will directly result in the death of the patient. Therefore, removal of respirator when it will directly result in the patient's immediate death is unequivocally prohibited. But you could remove the ventilator. Let's say if you find that the patient's breathing on their own, you could remove it if it's unrelated to the death process. Pain control and the use of morphine. The intent is purely to alleviate suffering, not to terminate life. So you could give it. If someone suffers from a terminal condition, such as cancer, or develops secondary infection, must the infection be treated? Yes, you should treat the secondary infections, maybe situations, as I pointed above, by Avram S. Avram, where you don't necessarily have to treat those secondary infections. Services of a Jewish hospice program are involvement of the designated spiritual or religious leader. Artificial hydration nutrition must be continued. DNR/DNI is not a requirement. Choosing to revoke the hospice benefit remains a choice. Okay, so basically what we've covered is we went over sources of mercy killing, of suicide. We went over key ideas halachically from the Mishnah Torah, Shulchan Aruch, by Goses. We went over Moshe Feinstein's writings regarding this a little bit. We went over Rabbi Steinberg. And then we went over the RCA comments, euthanasia approach by Avram S. Avram. Let's go back to the initial point, which was the case in Masada, where Elazar ben Yair actually actively killed people. He did it most probably because they were children and they couldn't decide for themselves. So you do see, so going back, looking at the whole, all these Gemaras, you do see that it wasn't so crazy in the sense that if he was doing it in order for them not to suffer, and in order for them not to do avodah zarah or shfichus dam gilui arayos, then there seems to be some precedent to do that. Of course, doing something actively to precipitate death is definitely a problem. Whether or not that's um, better than suicide, clearly we saw that suicide is just as bad. Um, but we do see the concepts here that it perhaps is not so crazy what he did. Um, so just like in the castle that we saw that those people killed themselves. Well, of course, we can't understand, um, but it does seem like there was some, at least, precedent for what they did, and that's the story.